Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Property4Media Meets. I'm Henry Hemming, now an advisor to Property4Media, the brand I started back in 2005. It's great to be here for the Great Budget Breakdown webinar. Yep, as we ask, what's the story for property PRs? It's the day after the night before. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has delivered Labour's first budget, and the media, in turn, are now delivering their verdict. And at this moment, and in the days and weeks ahead, there's a veritable football field of opportunities for our audience of comms professionals. And here to dissect, interpret, and yes, generally play football with the budget is a star-studded lineup of property editing and writing talent. We're thrilled with our lineup today. Let me introduce the panelists to you now, and they can give you a wave. They are Andrea Dean, leading property writer for many titles, and especially here, key property contributor to Metro. Hi, Andrea, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you.
Isabel Fraser, money features editor at The Telegraph. Isabel, thank you very much. Melissa York, assistant property editor at The Times and The Sunday Times. Melissa, a great pleasure. And Stephen Maunder, money news editor at Which. Stephen, thank you. Lovely. Well, thanks to everyone who registered for today. Well over 100 of you from brands ranging from Connells to Savills and many wider industry companies. Lots of agencies, FTI, Infomer, Luchford, many more. We're 24 hours on now, so we're looking at the storylines, not for hard news, but the storylines that will emerge in the weeks and months ahead, the longer term narratives and the feature opportunities that the budget inspires now that Labour has laid out its pitch. Together, of course, with any final news shout-outs that our panellists think you may still get from property editors. I'm going to give each of our panellists the chance to give a 5-minute or so overview of what they see as the key outcomes of this budget and the story possibilities, and then we'll lightly cover off with them everything from first-time buyers to housing supply and from inheritance tax to international homes. And after that, we will turn to you, our audience, for questions. So do please start placing questions in the chat. And if you could put your company name in there with your question, that would be great. Oh, and do be social. Copy in our panelists on your posts. And we're Property4Media on just about everything, possibly not TikTok. So first up, we're doing this alphabetically today. First up, to talk about the budget and its impact for property communicators is Andrea Dean. Andrea is a property, lifestyle and interiors journalist who writes for Metro and many other publications, covers everything from London to consumer stories and money-saving features. And for the Metro, she delivers on everything from London's best shared ownership schemes, I think that's going to come up today a lot, right through to exclusives, such as her recent revelation that property now sells more quickly in Basingstoke than any other British town. So we're all off to Basingstoke after this. Andrea, thank you very much, and over to you on your thoughts.
Oh, thanks, Henry. Hello, everybody. Good to see so many of you here today, and thanks for tuning in. For those of you who don't know me, I write mainly for Metro's weekly property supplement, as Henry's just said, which is published on a Tuesday and sometimes online. They can always find features in the e-edition. And I also write for Yahoo Finance. Although I can cover most property-related topics, for Metro, I write the weekly Neighbourhood Watch area focuses, which include buyer case studies. I also cover first-time buyers, home movers, affordable home buying schemes, new builds, incentives, and write mini or separate supplements such as the annual shared ownership week one and one-off case study features with particularly interesting stories to tell. Okay, and for Yahoo Finance, it's themed property roundups with a peg for them all the better, and weekly advice features, which I've just started, which I'll need comment for. Anyway, let's move on to the budget, which we're all here for. I'm sure I'm not the only one here who was hoping for some juicy new home buying schemes and tax relief to help first-time buyers, which we could get our teeth into, but that really didn't happen. In fact, the budget, it's as much about what was left out as what was covered. And I'll be talking mainly about Metro here, and rather than Yahoo, with regards to what we'll be looking for, post-budget in the weeks and months to come. So as no extra assistance for first-time buyers was announced, please keep me posted on anyone who's offering help in buying your first home, schemes that private developers might come up with, from ongoing incentives like deposit boost to ones like the Own New Rate Reducer scheme that's being run by multiple developers. And with the discount on stamp duty coming to the end, finishing at the end of March, I'll be doing roundups of like developments with properties under the £425,000 threshold that will be ready to move into by then. Case studies of buyers who've had to speed up their search and the process, what they did to ensure that they will be ready to buy. I'm also sure that I'll be doing something similar for Yahoo below this threshold, and we'll also be covering older resale properties as well as new builds, and features like tips that ensure you're in a position to buy and complete by the end of March. And I'll be doing other features, not so budget related, like auctions, red flags when property viewing, and pros and cons of buying new builds. And back to Metro, we'll be looking for case studies of small business owners who are hoping to buy their first home or move, and who've now been hit by higher taxes, and how to get around this. And also possibly features for Yahoo as well on how to invest in profitable buy-to-let or holiday homes now that they're hit by higher stamp duty and then capital gains tax. And I think we'll be looking much more at shared ownership and homes with ultra low deposits. So please keep sending case studies, details of new launches and everything else shared ownership related through. Also, please send data, any trends on where people are buying, perhaps, for example, in towns, counties, boroughs with lots of outstanding state schools, grammars and their catchments now that there's VAT on private school fees. And I also think we'll be covering rentals more, particularly as it looks like the sector's going to be squeezed, so they might well get more expensive. So, but build-to-rent developments, case studies, people who rent as a lifestyle choice, or ones who don't have any choice because they just can't afford to save for a deposit. I think I just mentioned data, but we are always looking for it, particularly if it's exclusive. Could be new hotspots for first-time buyers or home movers. Perhaps if there's a rush of first-time buyers suddenly moving out of London, where they get more for their money, particularly if it's under £425,000. Parts of London where the average house price is below this, not many, I think. And I'll leave it up to you to come up with ideas, because obviously I'm always looking for them, and all the better if there's a relevant case study. Just a bit about contacting me and how you send things through, if I've got time for this. Emails to phone calls, if possible. Apologies if I don't reply. I'm sure, like all the other panelists, I just get so many. But if it's something I'm able to use, I will definitely get in touch. And when sending emails, please put what it refers to in the subject line. For example, if I put a request on Property4Media for development resident case studies in Royal Wharf, do put this Royal Wharf in the subject line, because I do miss things like invitations if they've got something in the subject line that doesn't relate to that at all. And just a moment on case studies. For us to include them, apart from a great story with good background, we always need surnames, job, date they moved in. These are deal breakers and are missing a surprising amount of the time. And with photos, please don't send WeTransfer links that are about to expire. Get a lot of these. I'd never download them until the feature's ready. So yeah, just thought I'd mention that. But meanwhile, thank you, and back to the budget or the aftermath of it.
Very good indeed. Thanks, Andrea. I'm sure that will stimulate plenty of questions. So do get your questions in now for Andrea, perhaps about some of those areas outside central London that may now be attractive. So let's turn next to Melissa York. Melissa is the assistant property editor at the Times Sunday Times and works on both titles, award-winning property sections, which of course are Bricks and Mortar in the Times and Home for the Sunday Times. She writes news, investigations, features about the entire housing market from affordable rentals to luxury new builds. And she joined the Times in 2019 from City AM, where she was editor of Hot Property. Melissa, I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on Rachel Reeves' pronouncements. Over to you.
Thanks, Henry. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I mean, yesterday's budget, it wasn't groundbreaking for the housing market, but it did give us some interesting insights into what the government's direction of travel is. And obviously, at the Times and the Sunday Times, our reach is wide-ranging, it's national and international. It covers every aspect of the property market in depth, twice a week. All this is to say, there's no trend that's too small or incidental for us to cover. But I did want to give you an idea of what policies caught our eye here, and what implications we'll be looking out for, so you can discuss these issues with your clients and gather exclusive data accordingly. So the big overall story of the day was undoubtedly the hike in employers' contributions to national insurance, which kind of drew audible gasps from the Times business desk. So it's likely we'll only see this play out in the property market if it results in higher unemployment or lower wages. And both of these outcomes, if they happen, will take considerable time to filter through to the property market. But it's always something to keep an eye out for. Kind of far more urgent and immediately relevant for housing are the changes to stamp duty, obviously. So the increase in the additional home surcharge is not a huge surprise to us, although we were expecting, I'd say, 1% rather than 2%. Last night, it caused a flurry of portfolio landlords that we like to keep in contact with to tell us that they were rushing to get sales exchanged before the surcharge increased today. One landlord we spoke to was set to lose £50,000 if they couldn't get 7 transactions over the line in a matter of hours. And in the end, he got 2 over the line and only saved £13,000. But it's stories like that that obviously really humanise the numbers and get behind the effects for people. So we're always really interested in any stories like that. The increase in stamp duty is only set to raise about £400 million for the Treasury, which is a relatively small sum of money. Although every little helps, I'm sure, we suspect that this measure is more about prompting behavioural change and limiting buy-to-let investment in the property market, as George Osborne sought to do in 2015. This was further underlined to us in the Treasury's documents, which stated that it expected 130,000 homes to become available to first-time buyers as a direct result of this policy. While there was sort of much talk and selling in the run-up to the budget due to a rumoured increase in capital gains tax, Reeves's decision to keep CGT rates and corporation tax rates the same means that landlords will not lose any more of their profit if they sell today as if they sold yesterday. But the stamp duty means they're less likely to invest in new properties. So the average landlord is looking at £10,000 added to their bill, according to analysis by Savills carried out for the Times. And kind of buried further down was a boost for social landlords and the build-to-rent sector. So this kind of implies that the government, along with upcoming changes in the Renters' Rights Bill, is seeking to further professionalise the buy-to-let sector. Again, this is kind of emphasised by Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook earlier in the week when he said he supported mandatory regulation of property agents. All this is to say, as journalists, we want to hear how this plays out from landlords of all sizes and for tenants too. So we always want to hear human stories, meaning case studies, real life experience, anecdotes from your clients on the following. So how landlords are handling their sales to cope with these changes. Are they setting up limited companies in greater numbers? Are they unable to buy a new primary home until they've sold their buy-to-let, but they now have to do this in tandem to qualify for a surcharge refund? Are they scaling back on their investments? Are they negotiating offers down? From tenants' perspectives, has their landlord directly increased their rent to pay for stamp duty on a new investment? Are tenants buying their first property from their landlord? Is there an influx of former buy-to-lets on the market, or are first-time buyers registering with estate agencies in larger numbers than before? So this is all the kind of stuff that we really want to hear about. We must not forget that first-time buyers and home movers face increased stamp duty in March as the threshold extension runs out, as Andrea said. This is likely to impact people buying in more affluent parts of London and the south of England, but increases in property prices could drag new regions into this bracket for the first time. So we want to hear about it when they do and speak to people affected. Another big story was the changes to inheritance tax. Bringing pension pots into the scope of IHT could boost funds for the bank of mum and dad or grandma and grandpa, as older people give more of their money away sooner than they plan to their children to help them onto the property ladder. More money could be invested in property rather than pensions, but at the same time, increasing property prices means more estates will be dragged beyond this threshold over time. So the Institute for Fiscal Studies had an interesting stat. They said that the proportion of estates hit by inheritance tax was likely to rise from 4.39%, and that was in 21 to 22, to 7% by 2032 to 33. So far more people are going to end up paying it on their properties. Farmland that's worth more than £1 million will be taxed when inherited for the first time. This is because the Chancellor claimed that wealthy people were increasingly investing in agricultural estates to avoid tax. So obviously this could lead to families breaking up their estates or selling up sooner than they planned. And we want to hear about this too, especially from people who may have bought small holdings or parcels of land for rewilding during the pandemic, unaware of their potential tax liability. Mortgage rates are also likely to stay higher for longer, according to the latest OBR forecast. And this is set to dampen house price growth slightly, but we'll be paying close attention to the mortgage market and the subsequent dampening effect this could have on house prices, and whether this is more pronounced in sort of lower value owner-occupier markets, more so than it is in investment-led or cash-dependent markets. And kind of more incidental matters, but still things that might be interesting. The prime market is also likely to be affected by the budget, although we suspect we won't be focusing as much on its effect on this area of the market for two reasons. One is that it's kind of a smaller slice of the market that's obviously relevant to a much smaller part of our readership, and two, because the impact is likely to be limited. So the changes to nom-doms have been coming for a long time. They're rather vague as they stand. We hear many of the people affected may already have left. International investors, as far as we hear, are not too perturbed by 1 or 2% rises in stamp duty, as they tend to move their money to London as kind of a safe haven out of kind of less desirable regimes. Right to buy is another interesting point. A new government review suggested that they might reduce right to buy discounts down to pre-2012 levels, which is back to what Angela Rayner received herself. So I think it saved her £26,000 on a council house in Stockport at the time. But yeah, it massively boosted council sales basically from about 3,000 to over 11,000 once they increased those discounts. So we're interested to see whether this means fewer former council tenants become homeowners. And as 40% of these properties are rented out once they're bought, if this leads to a reduction in stock in the private rented market. Heat pumps always do incredibly well with our readers who do want to do the right thing by making their homes more energy efficient, a desire only intensified by higher energy bills. But we're pleased to hear the boiler upgrade scheme is popular from the Treasury and getting a bit more funding. So we're always looking for any very practical examples of this being used and kind of ways that people have upgraded older properties to make them more energy efficient. So I hope that's very helpful.
Melissa, that was breathtaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to ask some questions immediately, but I think we must keep going through the panel and I'll come back to you in due course. I turn next to Isabel Fraser, and Isabel is Money Features Editor at The Telegraph. I will just tell our audience that literally within the last 2 months, Isabel has passed 10-year mark with The Telegraph. I feel we should have a virtual cake or something. Probably can do that on screen. But congratulations, yes, on that eye-popping milestone, Isabel. And lovely to have you with us. Isabel's now the Money Features Editor, commissioning articles on everything from property to careers and retirement. She was previously a property editor and a business reporter. What stories is the budget prompting you to commission in the weeks and months ahead? And what is your take on the contents of the red box, please, Isabel?
Well, thanks for that terrible introduction. I really didn't need to be reminded that I've worked there for 10 years. But anyway, well, Melissa's really summed it up perfectly. And so I won't add too much because also, we all cover the same kind of thing. We're all interested in the same topics. I guess my remit is a bit different because I'm a money features editor. So we cover property, but also everything else, tax, pensions, investing, etc. So while I commission a lot of property stuff, it's more entangled, I suppose, maybe than Melissa's remit. So, I mean, I guess I'll start with, one of the Telegraph's big campaigns actually in the run-up to the budget was about landlords, and it was sort of a maybe amorphous campaign, but we were sort of trying to stop change to CGT, which I suppose we were successful at, maybe not on purpose. But I think we'll be writing obviously a lot more about landlords, buy-to-let, and whether it's worth investing anymore and how to do it. And the way the Money Desk is set up is that I write the features, there's a news section, and there's guides and advice as well. So, when PR's thinking about, how to get in touch with us and how to pitch us stuff, it's important to think like who and what you're pitching for. So if you look at our content and you think that, you've got a great case study, that comes my way. If you've got great research that can be chopped up and made into a feature, that's for me too. But if it's more about advice, or it's a topic you think we haven't covered in a guide, that's for those guys, so Danielle and Sam. And then if it's news, it goes to Emma, Helena, or Ben. But you can just contact us and then we'll pass it on. But I think it's important to understand what we're doing as a desk, and to sort of get a hold of our sort of the way we're trying to establish us. Anyway, so sorry, back to landlords. I guess, one thing we'll be looking at in the coming days is, the look at stamp duty and CGT, and actually stamp duty is probably a bit worse for landlords than a CGT change would be, and arguably we would say worse for tenants as well, because it will mean that fewer landlords buy. And if CGT had been hiked, then maybe fewer landlords would sell. So in theory, perhaps there will be fewer rental properties on the market. We'll also be looking at the impact on second homes, and I think we'll look a bit into, people already trying to sell up due to CGT in, Southwest, etc. So there'll be even fewer buyers wanting to buy because they've got to pay even more stamp duty now. What does that mean for the local markets? Does that mean that first-time buyers have a chance? Probably not, because they're different kinds of homes. But for those kinds of stories, we're looking for really great granular detail, research, where we can really isolate individual places rather than just regional stuff, which is sort of helpful. But we want to really dig into the places, the people. And also we want case studies. Case studies is really, really important. Case studies who will be shocked, case studies who will be open about their finances, and case studies that are not too puffy. So typically we will probably not do ones about people who live in developments, because often they're not very chatty and forthcoming with their finances, we typically find. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Other topics we'll be looking at in the coming days, sort of what people might think that this change to stamp duty is all concentrated in, it's just about landlords and second homes, but actually this has a huge impact on the whole market. So will chains be breaking down? This is potentially terrible for people buying a house now who think they're not affected. Again, case studies of that. And what else? We're going to be looking at mortgages and interest rates. OBR said that the mortgage rates will go up to 4.5% in 2027, which is sort of, I suppose, a bit counter to what people thought. And I guess more generally how, we've covered national insurance, we've covered pensions and inheritance tax. And I guess I see my job as seeing how all these different forces come together. So as Melissa said, this change for inheritance tax on pensions will definitely have a huge impact on Bank of Mum and Dad and people gifting. So for us, case studies of people who are affected by this change, how this is changing people's behavior, and they're sort of doing potentially sort of quite silly things to avoid tax, or and how that is we can sort of interpret maybe how that's affecting the housing market. I guess that's it for me. But yeah, happy to answer the question.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for those inspired thoughts and giving us that granular information on how your team works. That's so very helpful indeed, as Melissa did as well, and Andrea before that. Great. I've got stuff to come back to you on, definitely on that. Oh, and well done on the CGT victory. But we must introduce Stephen Maunder, the Money News editor of Which, who has also spent a decade as a financial journalist, specialising in mortgages and property. Brief period at Sky News, then joined Property4Media, working on What House, then joined Which 9 years ago. He progressed to his current role via jobs that included lead money writer and indeed consumer rights and scams editor. We're gonna need AI scams editors soon, I'm sure. Stephen, please, your thoughts on the budget.
Thanks, Henry. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so just to give a bit of background for what we do, so I think we work slightly differently to newspapers, etc. So at Which we mortgage and property is one of the key areas for us in the money space. We have around about 100 advice guides on mortgages and property, from right the way from first-time buyers all the way to kind of buy to let, new homes, etc. And we probably do around about the same number of news stories a year, so around about 100 news stories as well. And yeah, it's quite a popular area for us. Our advice brings in around about 1.5 million page views a year on mortgages and property. So it's quite a big prize for us, really. Three key areas that we look at are mortgages across the board, first-time buyers, and buy-to-let. We don't do as much kind of expert view stuff as a lot of other publications, but we are very interested in your data and your insight. You'll notice if you look at our current money news, there are certain companies, for example, Hamptons, Rightmove, etc., that provide very, very rich, detailed data on the housing market. And that's the kind of thing we have market analysts who like to dig into that and find interesting new angles. So you don't necessarily need to come to us with a fresh angle. Rather, if you come to us with some kind of market data, we might be able to find an angle that suits our readers best ourselves. So feel free to come to me on any of that, and I can put you in touch with the relevant people. In terms of the budget, I think the other guys have covered a lot of it really well. Just for our key areas, obviously stamp duty for landlords was a big deal, as everyone said. A lot of our readers are landlords. Most of them only have one or two additional properties. And I think the sentiment is really, it does feel like yet another blow for non-professional landlords. We've currently got the hokey-cokey of EPC changes still ongoing, likelihood of no-fault evictions finally being abolished. And we have readers who are simply saying, like, is it worth me doing this anymore? Is this a useful income stream? And obviously over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen a huge number of net disposals in buy-to-let. And as Melissa said, I think one of the topics we're really interested in as well is this greater professionalism in buy-to-let. So more company structures, more disposals from accidental landlords, and likelihood of greater investment in areas with reliably higher yields. So cheaper areas, possibly northeast is always the one that gets named because it has the lowest property prices. We're interested in any data you've got on that type of thing. In terms of first-time buyers, the stamp duty change, I think the government, rather ambitiously said will give first-time buyers an advantage over landlords, seems very, very ambitious to me to suggest that making things slightly more expensive for landlords will suddenly encourage lots of first-time buyers to be able to get on the ladder. The big issue for first-time buyers here is not that, it's the lapsing of the current stamp duty relief, which is currently at 425k, will be going down in end of March, start of April next year. Our data shows it's dragging home movers who already own properties into average bill increases of around about 2.5k. But for first-time buyers, a lot of people down in the southeast in London, and indeed markets such as Oxford, Cambridge, Brighton, etc., are looking at 6, 7, 8K increases in stamp duty from next April. So while this isn't a budget policy from the government to stop stamp duty relief, they had the opportunity to continue it and chose not to. I think that's crucial to say. So we will be keeping a close eye on stamp duty. It's a very popular topic with our readers. I think Andrea said lack of clear policies for first-time buyers is probably the final thing I wanted to mention. We've covered a lot about the various policies in the last government aimed at first-time buyers. Obviously, Help to Buy was a huge topic for us, as it was for everyone else. That scheme ended up eating itself and was replaced by a couple of quite bizarre house building schemes from the previous government. We had starter homes where no homes were built. We had first homes where I think there are more people in this webinar than homes built under first homes. So I can see this government is clearly trying to avoid those kind of big headline grabbing scheme related announcements. But what we're interested in, and Andrea is also interested in this, is how this affects what industry will have to do. So without these big announcements, we are going to have to look at the lending sector becoming more and more kind of showing its initiative and being inventive with the types of mortgage it offers, guarantor options, over things like Helping Hand. I think we see in the house building as well, the different kind of incentives going on, because without a big scheme to bracket everything to, there really is a clear thought that it's going to fall on industry to fill those gaps and to find a way of getting people onto the ladder. And I think that is something that we're very interested in. We have a lot of older readers at which, as you might imagine, and they're all kind of come to us and say, like, how can I help my children buy a home? How can I help my grandchildren buy a home? And it's not getting any easier, is it, with mortgage rates being as high as they are? I think they're the key things for us. We are sort of tangentially interested in house building. I'm particularly interested in this idea of stimulating house building from the government and how that will actually happen without incentivizing the larger house builders in some way, as Help to Buy did. Because the larger house builders build the vast majority of homes, and they ain't going to build really cheap, affordable homes at high volume unless they are given some kind of reason to do so by the government. So that is also something I'm interested in, any insights that anyone on this call has on that. I think that's everything, Henry, from me.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to pick up on that stimulating house building point, because, you know, we're there. Melissa, you recently wrote an article in the Times at the time of the Labour Party conference, where you said, waxing lyrical, Rachel Reeves promises shovels in the ground, cranes in the sky, a vision of a Britain which builds, which will be fueled by proposed planning reforms and could kickstart the biggest shake-up in house buildings for nearly 80 years. We've got a lot of people from house building in the audience, and you say, can Labour build 1.5 million new homes? Now we've got the budget and the budget framework. Are Labour going to come good on those promises, do you think, Melissa?
I mean, I don't think Labour thinks it's going to come good on those promises. I think when you talk to people within Labour, they say they realise that there are very real practical obstacles to that happening, some of which I outline in that piece, such as, you know, the length of time it takes to get planning and to build a lot of these things, right? So if you've got a Barratt development that's going to be more than, say, 100 homes, 130 homes, it takes them kind of a good 4 or 5 years to obtain planning permission, and then it takes them on average another 1.5 years before the first home is built. So I mean, you're looking at a good 6-7 years, and obviously the parliamentary term's only 5. So, you know, you've got, even if they do remove all their planning restrictions, make it much easier, and let's face it, cheaper. It's very expensive to get planning approval for a lot of this stuff as well. So that will get house builders' bottom lines down as well. It won't just make it easier for them to get planning permission, it'll also make it cheaper for them to do so, and for SME builders too. But even if they do all of that, it's still going to take a number of years for this to happen, right? So basically, I think Labour is very aware of that, but they think it's worth shooting for that goal anyway, because ultimately the reasoning is we need to make up for a lack of supply that successive governments have done absolutely nothing about. So we may as well shoot for the sky and see how far we can go. So, you know, if they don't reach that target, you know, the OBR said yesterday, they'll probably achieve about 1.3 million. And if they do, fantastic. You know, because the last government achieved their goal, which was 1 million. And they managed to do that. So if Labour does 1.3 million, I don't think we should chastise them for not quite reaching 1.5.
Okay, well, you can always hold her to those very words that you ran. So, Isabel, I'm going to ask you about people investing buy-to-let in second or multiple homes, because there was precious little good news there. One of your own team, Sam Brodbeck, said yesterday, in a sentence, "It's pretty clear the government doesn't want you to have a second home." Do you think that's basically right? Because you mentioned how the budget is about balancing all those different parts of fiscal and expenditure. But is the government basically saying we don't want to motivate people into second home buying?
Sam is a bit hyperbolic, but yeah, I think he's probably right that the Tory government, I think initially when the Tory government started going after buy-to-let, people were surprised because, you know, it's very like small c conservative and big C conservative as a sort of way to save for retirement or something like that. And so now that this has happened in the budget, it sort of, well, it seems like business as usual, but it also was part of the more ideological sort of things that were going on in the budget, like the private jets thing. It just seems like, of course, they did it. And I think that, yeah, I mean, Rachel Reeves is a landlord, and I'm sure many Labour MPs are landlords too. But yeah, I don't think they like really do want people to own second homes, or they don't really like landlords. But I suppose they have to work with them. But yeah, I think this was all pretty ideological, and it also won't raise very much money either.
Cool. So to extend ideologies further, did they then help the individual, the first-time buyer, the people who've not been able to get onto the property ladder? Let me ask Andrea that. Do you think there was sustenance in yesterday's budget for people who want to buy their first property?
No, I don't. And there was nothing to help them at all. And if it's going to be more difficult for landlords to buy properties, then can't say inevitably, and rent's going to go up. So tenants are going to have less money to be able to save a deposit. I don't think they did anything to help at all.
Melissa, do you feel that there was nutrition in the budget for first-time buyers, people trying to get onto the property ladder?
There was no kind of demand incentive. I think what Labour was doing was they were assuming that the demand was there, which is true. Obviously, there's huge demand from private renters to become homeowners. And that whenever kind of Help to Buy or anything came around, you had some people saying, well, that's just stoking demand for supply that isn't there. So, I mean, no, there wasn't really anything specific, but I guess what they might say is we're working on increasing the supply of new homes, and in turn that will eventually help first-time buyers. But yes, there's no kind of great financial incentive there immediately.
Okay. And in terms of kind of that and house prices, Jeremy Clark of Lawson Clark says purchasers have been sitting on their hands waiting, firstly, for the election to get done and the budget to be delivered. Does the panel believe that buyer confidence will return and that the property market will start moving again, or will we have to wait for spring? Stephen, do you have a thought on that? What's going to happen with property prices and the property market?
Yeah, I think we've seen in the last sort of 4 or 5 months or so, we have started to see property prices begin to creep upwards again, albeit at a slow rate. I think the best case kind of estimates at the moment, sort of across the board, are that sort of low single-digit growth over the next year or so, kind of 3-4% perhaps. but a lot will depend on what happens to the base rate and mortgages, particularly to first-time buyers, because at the moment we have seen high loan-to-value mortgages essentially get left behind. We've seen a lot of headlines, and we've done them too, about mortgage rates going down below 4%. People on 95% mortgages still paying way over 5%. And the issue in that part of the market is you can theoretically borrow quite a lot of money, but you definitely can't afford to pay it back when the rate's 5.5%. So I do think the home mover market seems to have freed up a bit. Prices seem to be rising a little bit, but I fear a little bit for that first-time buyer sector, to be honest, without some kind of stimulus from the government to get that moving again.
Yeah. And as we've discussed, picking up on a question here from Wesley Barnard, head of PR at Fine & Country and the Guild of Property Professionals, the government is targeting property investors in this budget, but do we think the measures they put in place will ultimately make the rental market more expensive as buy-to-let investors leave? Andrea, do you have a thought on whether that's actually going to happen as a result of this?
Well, I think at the moment, yes, it probably will. If landlords quit the market, then obviously the supply is going to be reduced. I mean, long term, if there's more of an emphasis on BTR, then there will be more supply. But obviously, you know, a lot of the landlords, it's perhaps a cheaper end of the market, whereas BTRs, they have great facilities, etc., but they're not cheap. You know, a lot needs to be done.
Yeah. Anyone else got a prediction on that, on rental supply?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? It's the thing is, I mean, you know, I did a piece recently on John Lewis entering the build-to-rent market, and they seem pretty, you know, pretty reasonable, really. It's that thing where as soon as it becomes mainstream and as soon as a big brand like that introduces it to the public and shows them that actually this is a viable option, then hopefully you'll have lots of other people, whether that's retailers or, you know, Barratt or someone, you know, going into this market themselves. But as Andrea says, that's going to take time. And in the meantime, people need places to live. So, I think that I think what's important to bear in mind is that, you know, it's not going to cost them any kind of more to sell their property, because CGT has stayed the same. When it comes to investing in new properties, I think they're going to be very interested in, obviously, EPC C or higher, so they don't have to do anything to them. And the sort of thing that's low entry point, big capital gain over a certain number of years. We still speak to a lot of portfolio landlords that are still buying properties, but I just think it's going to shift away from, oh, let's keep my first flat as a good investment, which obviously a lot of people did. It's going to shift towards people that have got 30, 40, 50 properties that are basically looking for capital investment. And in that case, yeah, they're going to have absolutely no qualms about raising the rent. There's going to be much less negotiation with that kind of landlord.
Very, very true. Andrea, you mentioned in your opening there was little in the way of tax relief and no new fancy house buying schemes. Alice McCutcheon, Creative Director at the Oracle Group, asked, since Help to Buy is not being delivered by this new government or any other similar initiative, will shared ownership now be the main way for first-time buyers to purchase their home? So as our shared ownership expert, what do you think?
Well, I think it probably will be. I mean, obviously, it's not for everybody. If you've got a joint income of over 90,000 in London or 80,000 outside it, then you won't be eligible for it. I mean, I'd be interested to see the numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but how many shared ownership schemes are in the pipeline, where the numbers will be increasing. But I think a lot of people will be looking at it, and particularly who might not have considered it before. Yes, and of course, then there's a much lower deposit requirement as well, which makes a huge difference. I mean, that's the main reason for a lot of buyers. Yeah. I mean, whether there'll be more of an emphasis also from PRs, it's very much all about the new developments, which is completely understandable. But I don't get a lot through about shared ownership resale, and I wonder if more can be made of that type of home.
And thank you. And Stephen, what do you think the kind of story narratives will be about first-time buyers in the year ahead following this budget?
That's a really great question. I do agree that I think things like shared ownership are still going to be a necessity for a lot of people, particularly in places like London. It's kind of a long-standing legacy of the kind of the property market that we've got now, that aspiring to buy a chunk of a property rather than buy a whole property is where we're at. And that's been the case for quite some time now. I think over the next year, I think we will see mortgage rates drop down a little bit for first-time buyers. I think it will help people buy in the standard owner-occupier market to a bit. Bank of grandma and granddad, bank of mum and dad. We all write about it. It's going to be even more significant because house prices aren't likely to drop significantly. But I think a lot of first-time buyer movement over the next year might simply come from the decision being made of, like, look, we've been waiting to see how much better things will get with new governments, with budgets, with base rates, mortgage rates. And we're just going to have to press the button now because it doesn't look like it's going to get loads better in the short term. So I think that kind of, as Melissa mentioned earlier, there is a pent-up demand. It's just how many of those people can actually afford to take the leap in the short term.
Very interesting, very interesting. Got quite a few other areas of the budget to cover off. Let's turn to overseas property. I've got one question live on overseas and one in advance. So Dylan Smart from Rooster says, is there anything in the budget announcement you would expect to impact the overseas luxury market, increasing numbers of UK citizens buying abroad because perhaps they feel the tax regime at home is not now that conducive? And Holly Moore, who from Senior Account Director of Mercury Communications, who always writes wonderful questions, says, with the stamp duty surcharge increasing to 5% on second homes, is this going to possibly make global property markets look relatively more attractive? And I'll start with Melissa there, because I know you do quite a bit from time to time on overseas.
Yeah, it's in terms of more Brits buying abroad and luxury properties abroad. I would say not. It depends, basically. If they're buying in Europe, obviously Brexit had an impact whereby it very much limits the amount of time you can spend in Europe. And there's been, I think it's a 9% drop in Europeans buying properties over here in London as a result. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was the same the other way around. But the people buying in Europe tend to be lifestyle purchases. They tend to be, I want a bit of sunshine for my retirement, and I want to buy a French chateau and do it up, and it's all things like that. So I think that market, that desire is still very much the same, to be honest with you. It's just now they've got to make a decision about whether to move there full time, whereas before they used to be able to flip back and forwards. And so that's obviously going to change the type of purchase they make. We are seeing obviously places that are positioning themselves as essentially tax havens. And so, you've got more people buying in Dubai, for instance, and then maybe living out there for a couple of years, making lots of tax-free income. But inevitably, they do tend to come back again. They tend to come back for healthcare, for family reasons. They're kind of boomerang purchases almost. So, I think that's a very interesting development, particularly in parts of the United States that are positioning themselves in that way, Austin, Texas, and places like that. Utah's another one, very interesting, seeing Brits going over there for exactly the same reasons. But I'm not sure whether that's a real long-term trend for overseas investment from Brits.
Interesting. And Isabel, do you think we'll see any, you cover wealth management, will we see any appreciable shift towards overseas property purchasing from this budget?
I suppose the one thing that was announced that might affect it was non-doms, but we sort of knew that already. And if you're a non-dom, I think you've already made up your mind, and probably not really based on what was said at the budget. So I think among our readers, we get a lot of comments saying, I'm leaving. They're just fed up with, as you can imagine, real or just perceives of Britain's going to the dogs kind of situation. But actually, I'm not entirely sure whether they're actually going or it's just sort of bluster. I think, as Melissa says, it's sort of, there's little peaks of, some places like crop up, and we're seeing like Greece says that British people are getting golden visas there, but the rises are so from such a low base that, you know, actually the people going, it's not that many.
Okay, interesting. So on the chat, we have a question from Anonymous. Any interest in self-build? So does the budget do anything for self-builds in terms of people investing in individual plots and former agricultural buildings? And actually, just let me also raise there Kirsty Allsop, who's said that this, in terms of inheritance tax, this budget is a nightmare for people passing farms and estates down through their families. Is that a fair comment from the voluble Kirsty? What does anyone feel about that?
As ever, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, I'm a bit of have a vested interest because my in-laws are farmers, and they're in hysteria. But curiously, my partner, who works in agriculture and is obviously the son of farmers, actually thinks this move is a good thing. So, you know, I think you can obviously, as with everything, see it both ways. But from a money point of view, I mean, it is terrible. And we ran a case study yesterday, and it was, as I was editing it, I was feeling, oh God, it was so depressing. Like, this is playing with people's livelihoods in a way that actually is quite unusual for a government. I don't know, because farming is so tangled up with your life and your fight. You know, you work sort of 16 hours a day with your cows, and then it's so part of your life. So yeah, I think Kirsty and sorry to say, Jeremy Clarkson have a point.
Well done. Excellent. Okay, we've got 6 minutes. I promised the panel we'll stop absolutely on time, so we're going to quick fire questions. Picking them up off here. I think this is a more general one from, let's just see. Okay, Jesse Samuelson asks, according to the OBR's forecast, 25% of non-doms with offshore trusts will leave the UK after reforms in the budget. What impact do you think this will have on the London super prime market? You know, I guess my question is this also true? Will it have this impact, or, as Isabella's suggested, do people like to just fulminate and rage, but then forget it the next day? Melissa, the impact on that market, do you think it will be tangible?
I think, trying to answer as quickly as possible, a lot of the people that would be affected by that kind of thing have already left. And actually, if I'm working on a piece at the minute, the vast majority of overseas property investors here are looking to live here. They're not looking just to park their money in the sky, contrary to popular belief, and actually increasingly looking to buy for their kids when they go to university here. It's something like 40% of the mainland Chinese market are buying for their kids who are studying at university here. That they're not those kind of people. That's where the majority of our property investment is coming from. So no, I don't think it's going to have a massive impact. It might have a small impact, but I don't think it's going to have a massive one.
And Stephen, what do you think on that point? Do you think it's going to have an impact? And by the way, everyone, Jesse Samuelson, Senior PR Manager of Knight Frank, good question. Stephen, what do you think?
I think this is one that Melissa can explain much better than I can. But yeah, I think I kind of broadly agree with that, to be honest. We have seen that overseas investment, particularly in if we look around what's happened around King's Cross in the last sort of 5-10 years, and down at Battersea, Wandsworth, where you will rarely see a light on in a window at night time in those new developments, sadly. But yeah, I think these things may have an impact, but to be honest, it's not really a thing we cover a great deal, the super prime market, so I can't comment too much.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'm going to do 2 more quickly in this time. One from Anonymous. From today's webinar, it's clear that case studies are super important for everyone, be it the Metro, Times, Telegraph. When talking about case studies from house builders and new build development specifically, how important is it that a case study is not used on house builders' websites or socials before it's given to you as an exclusive, I think I can sense what the answer might be here. We work with SME developers, says our viewer here. And I'm going to ask Andrea that first. Exclusivity, how important?
Well, if it's described as exclusive, I would expect it not to have appeared anywhere else. But we don't always need exclusive. So what would really help is if people are transparent, because I'd just like to know where it's been, but it doesn't mean we won't use it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Anyone else on that before I come to our last question? I've got a good final question.
Yeah. I'm again, be transparent about it. You know, the house builders, especially for an SME house builders, website is not going to have the reach of the Times. There's not a lot of crossover in the people coming across them, perhaps. And also, we will always phone them up and speak to case studies. So we're going to get different things out of them. Sometimes we choose to shoot them ourselves, and it looks completely different. So yeah, I'm not averse to it.
Fantastic. Okay, our last question of this sizzling webinar comes from Holly Moore at Building Relations. I'll hopefully give you a second to think about it. She says, I'm picking up on the fact that Andrea started with, this is a budget about what was left out. And Holly asks, what policy would you, the panelists, have introduced in yesterday's budget, had you been Chancellor, to help first-time buyers? So what was missing in yesterday's budget for first-time buyers that you think might have been a really, really whizzo idea? Who would like to start on that? Maybe Andres, you mentioned this point earlier.
Hey, yeah, I can't be specific, but definitely some help for first-time buyers. Perhaps something like Help to Buy, not necessarily with the loan that a lot of buyers are having difficulty in paying off, but perhaps more something like discounted, like first homes, but something that was actually really going to happen. So perhaps 20–30% off, discount market sale, but that's not very widely available at all.
And yet discounts on right to buy were reducing the budget. And actually, for the panelists, do extend this out to anything in the budget you think was missing yesterday that really we could have done with hearing. Stephen, can I come to you next? What would be your big missing one from the budget?
I would do what Andrew just suggested, but with mortgages instead. I would find a way of making mortgage rates at 90% and 95% loan to value much more affordable, be that through a temporary government-backed cut or through an agreement with lenders.
Fantastic. And Melissa, to you next.
It's me. You cut out a little bit. So I had to guess it was me. Sorry. It's no, I probably, let's go really radical and say I think abolishing stamp duty for first-time buyers would be great. I don't think you raise very much money from them anyway, and actually would help a lot more people in London and the southeast where they need to live for work actually be able to afford places. Also, maybe for 1 and 2 beds, not family-sized homes, you could give first-time buyers first dibs for a month on those kind of properties for new builds, so that they're not all snapped up by investors right away. And that way you're not distorting the market, you're not inflating house prices, but you're giving them a fair shot and giving them more money in their pocket.
Well, there's always next year for that. And finally, Isabel, what are your thoughts on what was missing?
Well, having written about how Help to Buy has pushed up house prices for, many years, I'd go for more of a supply side option. So I guess something helping planning, like changing it to a zoning system for certain areas of cities, like encouraging building above tube stations in like very specific areas where there's lots of transport and infrastructure already, but which are being held back by, I don't know, aspects to do with how inefficient the planning system is, and also push to like speed up that kind of building as well, and do it specifically for tenures and types of property that are lacking in those areas.
Terrific, wonderful. Well, we need to wrap, everyone, but I just can't thank enough our wonderful panel today, all chancellors in the making. They are once again, and finally, Andrea Dean, Isabel Fraser, Melissa York, and Stephen Maunder. thank you, all four of you, for your contribution, and thank you to you, our audience, for joining us for this webinar. It's been very, very enjoyable. See you next time.
Thank you.